Today we begin the season of Advent, and the word Advent means coming. So during the season of Advent, we focus on the coming of Christ. And we can think of three of his comings. So he came 2,000 years ago, and we are preparing ourselves during this Advent season to celebrate the anniversary of his first coming, his birthday, on December 25th. So we are preparing for Christmas. And as we get closer to Christmas, the readings will focus more on Christ. But we also prepare ourselves, or should prepare ourselves, for Christ coming to us here and now. Every time we attend Mass, he becomes present on our altars under the appearance of bread and wine. And he comes to us when we receive him in Holy Communion. And it's a reminder to us to prepare ourselves for that encounter with Christ, to ensure that we are properly disposed. If we've committed a serious sin, we need to go to confession before we can receive our Lord in Holy Communion. As you know, we have confession before every Mass. We will also have confession during 1 week in December, so the week of December 12th. And here at St. Aidan's, it will be on Tuesday, December the 14th, from 7 to 9 p.m. We will have 3 priests available if you wish to go to confession at that time. So we prepare for Christ's first coming to celebrate that at Christmas. We prepare for his coming now to us in Holy Communion. But we are also called to prepare for his final coming, his second coming, at the end of time. And today's gospel reading focuses on that. And when we think of Christ's second coming at the end of time, he will come to judge all of us. So he will come to establish the fullness of his kingdom. There will be a new heaven and a new earth, and the old world as we know it will be destroyed. And so it's not surprising that our Lord talks about, the distress amongst the nations, the roaring of the sea and the waves, and people will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world. So in other words, the world as we know it will be destroyed. Everything will be shaken. And it will be a time of great fear. And I think most people would be filled with fear. But our Lord is warning us and telling us to be prepared so that we are not filled with fear. When it comes to fear, it's not just in regards to the end times, but I think even when we think of our own death, if our own death was imminent or approaching, I think many people are filled with fear, which is understandable. We fear the unknown. But even when it comes to death, God doesn't want us to be afraid. So whether it's our own eventual death or the end of time, don't be afraid. Trust in God. But yes, we do have to be prepared. And our Lord tells us how to be prepared. He says, don't be weighed down, be on guard so that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life. And then he talks about, praying at all times so that you may have the strength to escape, or rather to get through these trials and tribulations that you may have to face. So don't be caught up in dissipation, the things of this world, selfish pursuits, sinful pursuits, or drunkenness, not just drunk with alcohol, but just overindulgence in the things of this world, the good things of this world. And he says, don't worry. Don't be weighed down with worry. We worry so much. We have to trust in God. When it comes to our own eventual death, as I mentioned, we tend to be afraid, partially because of the unknown of the reality of death, but also because we want to cling to the world that we know. We want to cling to what we presently have. And in the end, we have to let go of everything. When it comes to death, I may have spoken to you a number of times about people who've had near-death experiences. So a near-death experience is when someone actually dies, their soul leaves their body, sometimes only for a very short period of time, but they experience all kinds of things in the afterlife. And then for some strange reason, they come back to life. I don't think it's a strange reason, but I think it's a miracle of God. I think God allows these things to happen to strengthen us in our faith. There are some people who do not believe in near-death experiences. In fact, there was a neurosurgeon, Dr. Aidan Alexander. He said, oh, these near-death experiences, just a state of the mind, because the mind or your brain is not getting enough oxygen. So he didn't believe in them until he himself had a near-death experience. He developed meningitis, which is it's kind of an infection of the brain, either bacteria or a virus attacks your brain and actually eats away at your brain. So most people who get this, they die, or even if they recover, they have like permanent brain damage. In the case of Dr. Aidan Alexander, he was in a coma for a long time. In other words, this condition, this meningitis, lasted for a very long period of time. So it's like doctors knew he wouldn't recover, he would have major brain damage, even if he did survive. But miraculously, he recovered and he got his full faculties back. He didn't suffer any brain damage. And based on his own experience of a near-death experience, he wrote a book called Proof of Heaven. And so now he believes in near-death experiences. And there's all kinds of evidence, when people have this near-death experience and their soul leaves their body, afterwards they can recount what people were saying. There was one case of a man, he was on the operating table, he died for I don't know how long, but his soul left his body, went down into the cafeteria where his family, his relatives were waiting for the end of the operation. They were having their meal, they were discussing things, and afterwards he was able to relate everything they spoke about. So it's not just a state of the brain, but rather the soul actually leaves and was able to experience various things. Many people, when they have a near-death experience, they encounter their deceased loved ones. They see them, they interact with them. One of the things that they point out about people who have near-death experiences, what's common to most of these people, is they have a heightened sense of their own existence, their own consciousness. They're much more fully aware of who they are and what they are. And they usually have their life flashes before their eyes. In other words, they see all the major events in their life, the good things they did, the bad things, the things that happened to them, including bad things, and they just see everything in a flash. And also, what they point out is that these people, when they have a near-death experience, some of them, experience the presence of God and all their worries melting away and just a sense of peace and joy and a tremendous feeling of being loved, especially when they encounter God. Now, not everybody encounters God when they have a near-death experience. And in fact, some people go in the other place. They go down to hell. In fact, there was a priest, Father Stephen Schreier, who was involved in a head-on collision. And eventually he did come out of it. But during the time that he was under, he had a near-death experience, and he related afterwards that his sentence was hell, that he was deserving of hell. He had neglected his prayer life, and who knows what else he was doing, but he was destined for hell. But God gave him a second chance. What's also very interesting is that people who've had near-death experiences, after they come to, they are no longer afraid of death. Not just because the element of the unknown is removed, but because usually they have a good experience. So they know, they can affirm there is life after death. Interestingly enough, statistics point out that 5% of the population has a near-death experience. That's 5 out of 100 people. It's quite a lot. It's quite a high number. I've personally encountered about 10 people who've had near-death experiences. One was a lady that I went to anoint in the hospital, and she related her experience, and she said, well, if that's what's going to happen after I die, I'm no longer afraid to die. So I believe that God allows these near-death experiences, or miraculously arranges for them to happen, to remind all of us of the reality of life after death, the reality of heaven and hell, but also to remind us not to be afraid, to trust in Him, to do what we can to prepare, whether it's for the end of the world or for our own eventual death. And if we do this, then we have nothing to fear.